Okay, welcome back to this special business meeting after a break to do our regular business meeting. We are on to our last couple items remaining on that agenda. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Glenday to get us started with the discussion on these last two items.
Thank you. Through the mayor. Linda Glenday, CAO here at the District of Squamish with Jonas Velaneskis, Senior Director of Community Development. We are providing a very brief presentation to inform council's discussion on the motion regarding pipeline risk assessment that is outstanding from previous budget workshop. You have Jonas and I here because Ms. St. Louis, who's the General Manager of Public Safety and normally would be presenting, has been the EOC Director for the last 2 days, managing the high water activity and challenges there. So we are dividing and conquering, as they say. And with that, I will go to, where am I driving here? There we go. The two motions that are in the report to council are recommended from staff. We recognize that a motion was deferred that referred to societal environmental risk assessment of the pipeline. In terms of the district's jurisdiction around pipeline safety and recognizing council's concerns around information that the community and council would need, what we're recommending are two things, like a twofold here. One would be that Fortis come back and provide their presentation on pipeline safety. This was presented to the last council back in 2022, and they've agreed if council's amenable that they could come back and provide that presentation in the public again and answer any outstanding concerns that this council would have. So that is one recommendation. And then the next would be to bring back the scope of our emergency response planning as it relates to the industrial projects. So essentially WLNG and the Eagle Mountain pipeline. This is within the jurisdiction of council and the advice that you received. Scoping out information about the pipeline safety in terms of response that the district may need to provide. And that information at this point, we're looking at dovetailing into our other plans. So, sorry, I need my glasses here. The community risk assessment, the all hazards plan, and then the Sea to Sky multimodal evacuation plan. And generally what happens is those plans will be updated with an appendices. And so there's novel hazards, so new hazards that a pipeline or an LNG plant would bring, and then what's called incremental hazards. So hazards that already exist that may be compounded. And that's the limit of my technical expertise on emergency management planning that I will provide. But that work is ongoing currently with our work with the emergency planning team and working with WLNG and the EGP. And we would recommend that we can bring that work back and the scope that's included in that at a future committee of the whole. Before council moves into the discussion, I just do want to point out that the motion on the slide is different than in the report. Ms. Bombletto helped me with this in terms of tying in the previous motion with the recommended motions. Should council decide to go this direction, it closes the loop on all of the outstanding motions from the budget workshops.
Okay, thank you. Just before we entertain questions, I just have a couple points of clarity of my own. I understand that not the entirety of council was here for that original presentation, and I don't recall all of it, although it's captured online. But they're readily available to do that too. So timing is more about where we can find space for it rather than availability. Or can you speak to the timing of when that piece would happen? And I'll have a similar question for the second bullet point. So you could go ahead and answer that one too.
Thank you. Through the mayor, Fortis has indicated they're readily available. It would be a matter of finding time on an upcoming agenda.
And also when would we, so for the second point, the scope of the emergency management plan, um, when would that be, like how much prep would staff need to do that from where they are? And just what, if that was, my thought is if we are satisfied with that, perhaps that with that conversation, that might be then that might look after this, the concern that we're trying to address, or it may not. So how soon can that happen?
Through the mayor, it would take longer than the first one because staff would have to put it together. The work is just launching now. It was delayed by the labor dispute. It won't obviously be before council considers budget readings. But again, this motion is more about where is the district's jurisdiction and where does this information make the most sense? So it likely could be done in Q1 of 2026, but I would have to confirm with our public safety team.
Okay, thank you for that context. Council questions. And I just want to recognize that some of these, there's will be questions for staff, but a lot of this is likely debate for us. So make sure we point, if we could keep our minds on pointing the right questions, the right direction, especially as we are approaching our 11th hour here of the day. Councillor Pettingill, you want to get started?
Yeah, I'll start with the first one, number 5 here, which I see as sort of tangential because the whole reason we're here is because Fortis didn't answer the questions at the last presentation. They declined to. So, and I know the mayor has been really asking Fortis for years now to provide the answers. Have they changed and suggested that they are ready to provide answers to some of the questions that have been asked, or are they just offering to give the presentation they gave before?
Through the mayor, I can't answer that. We asked them if they'd be available and willing to provide the presentation that they provided. If council has additional questions, we could certainly send them to Fortis in advance.
I guess I would sort of leave this to my colleagues, I guess, whether or not it's of interest to them. To me and my experience in thinking about, my experience with companies like this is that, and I've learned this over time, is they won't sort of, and they get legal advice not to say anything beyond we're compliant with all regulations. And that's kind of what we heard last time. And so I can't foresee gaining any, and because we've chased them for a couple of years about this. So for me personally, I don't see value or new information coming forward here, but maybe my colleagues do.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, to my council colleague, July 2022 was a long time ago and it's been a long day. Can you remind me what is it that you're asking for that is different that when was presented in that presentation?
Well, essentially, my short story synopsis of what they sort of said is they talked about the Z663, which is the regulation that speaks to our jurisdiction over land planning around pipelines, and that it is guidance. Their presentation said it's regulation and guidance, was actually it's just guidance, and they said we're compliant with all regulation, and they sidestepped the whole piece of there's a whole bunch of guidance in there that they're not compliant with, and then what that means in terms of risk they weren't prepared to speak to. And so those are the gaps that I pushed them on last time, was not able to get a response on. And the one new thing that came out in that presentation that wasn't available previously was the fact that this pipeline is much bigger than anything anywhere else in their system, and they don't have anything of this magnitude in proximity to people. That was the only sort of new place. But what that means in terms of practical risk, there was no really willingness to speak to that, or ability. I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. If I may just follow up to my council colleague, they did provide individual risk, societal risk, 4 different components of the pipeline: valve failure, equipment impact. And the motion that you had previously brought forward speaks to kind of this high level 4 to 5 page risk assessment. So I'm just trying to understand how that differs from the numbers that have been presented. So I understand that it may didn't address all the issues that you are concerned about. But I'm just trying to provide clarity on what it is that we're actually asking for.
So my understanding of the presentation at the time was that this is sort of the risk that came out if you sort of went with the classification system in the Z662, which is not specific to our populations and does not necessarily specific to things like that is contrary to guidance like building under a road, the level of feature development and interactivity, proximity to childcare. Like they weren't paying attention to the development scenarios we have. And so questions about like, what is the sensitivity? Do these things make a difference, a meaningful difference in the risk level? And so so can we assess like, if you just comply with the regulation and all guidance, my understanding is, and you assume a population at the class 4 threshold, which is the highest threshold, which we could have a much greater population and thus in theory, a much greater risk. None of that they were able to speak to. And so I'm trying to get a more concrete sense in the range of populations we might have. What's the range of risk? How does things like building longitudinally under a road impact risk or not? And so it's these details that they aren't able to speak to. It just came back to we're compliant with regulations. And in the engineers I've been speaking to, they've been very clear with me that compliance with regulations and compliance with the CSA, which is Fortis, does not tell you about risk levels.
I think when I look at the recommendations, and first of all, I'm appreciative of these recommendations. I see a scenario here just to offer my share where I am on this as we contemplate motions. I think that as Councillor Stoner said, it was a while ago, and the nuances of those conversations might be lost on those that were here, and certainly the folks that weren't haven't had an opportunity to engage with the subject matter. So I see a scenario where we do both of these things and see where the gap is. I acknowledge that Councillor Pettingill, but also Council passed the first resolution because we felt that there was a gap broadly. And I think coming out of this, I don't know, the emergency management piece to me makes I don't know how you do an emergency management plan if you don't understand the scope of the impact of an event to manage your emergency response to. So I wonder if doing both of these things, then as a council, we can look and see what gap remains. Maybe it's the same gap, but when we're considering directing funding and the scope of that funding for a study, I think we need to really be crisp on this. And I'm around the table, I hear I'm feeling different levels of that. And I think that if we did both of these things, then whatever the gap is should be very, very evident, and we can very clearly articulate it. And perhaps that can be addressed with adjusting the scope, if appropriate, of that emergency management plan exercise. That might be an opportunity to address it. Or if not, then we could consider whether the gap is sizable enough for us to lean into with a financial commitment to address it, and then that gap can be better articulated and supported broadly around the table. That's the issue I see with that approach that I just outlined is timing and our patience to get through that process to get there. So that's the downside I think I see to that. So and I don't see any risk in item 5 happening. Just in general, see if we get the same answers to the same questions or similar questions. That's generally where I am at this point. So, Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I'm feeling a little bit anxious about the mention of, this will clarify where jurisdiction is. The Z663, I've read through it multiple times, is very, very explicit that we are a jurisdiction having authority, and as such, we have jurisdiction for land planning around pipeline risk. And so that's explicit. It doesn't say we must do that, but it talks about that is our responsibility. And so there's nothing, I would need a lawyer to sort of say our exposure if we decline. And I know many jurisdictions don't bother, but it's very clear in the standard, and the BC energy regulator has been explicit that Z662 and Z663 are some of the standards that they look to in pipelines. So there's not a question about jurisdiction. There's a question of whether or not we want to investigate and possibly act if we feel that there's a concern. And so if we're talking about, as part of 6, understanding how we will address the questions I have raised in 6, if Fortis doesn't provide those answers, maybe I could be comfortable that I am hesitant about a situation where Fortis again doesn't answer those things. And then we get to 6 and we're told, well, it's not your jurisdiction and we're not going to answer those. And if you want to try and get that done, then it's next year's budget that you have to put another motion forward. We had a motion for 3 weeks ago for options to get this information, and we still haven't seen those options. And so I want to make sure that I can support something that gets us this information. And so if it's an adjustment, if maybe staff can suggest an adjustment to number 6, that would ensure we include the missing information in the scope if it's not provided by Fortis or something like that.
Mr. Vilnius.
If I could just add one consideration to number 5, and the value of that is that the CSA standards get updated from time to time. And it's quite likely that a related standard to gas pipelines has been updated since 2022. This will provide Fortis an opportunity to include that information on their compliance.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Pettingill. That's a great point. I as much as the deliver a presentation, they probably have a pipeline safety presentation, but that may not be the identical presentation to what we saw, given that things can change. But if I recall, it was at that same meeting, or perhaps it was another engagement we had with them, where we had the regulator, not Fortis, or attend along with. And I just with this recommendation, was that a consider? I personally didn't find that piece of conversation particularly enlightening, but at the same time, it's the folks responsible for. Just, is Fortis the one? Is it this combined thing, and we do that again? It's not just also for our knowledge around the table, but for community's knowledge, as this thing is becoming far more real in the community. But has there been any discussion with putting this together? I know it was quick trying to address the concerns, but was there a discussion around inviting the energy regulator?
That is something we could take back and explore if there's potential. Absolutely.
Okay, Councillor Pettingill.
I believe Z662 was last updated in 2021, and I believe Z663 is older than that. These are the CSA made them freely available. I think I paid $280 when I got Z663 because I wanted to see what it said. But they are now available, so we can see when they've been updated, and so we don't need Fortis to tell us that.
Okay, so we have the recommendation here. Our first motion, this is meant to address, in a way, the first motion, the initial motion we passed. So we need to choose a direction, whether it's this recommendation or another course. This is, I think that to start off the debate on this matter, I'll move the recommendation, and if it's seconded, we can go from there. Question before that?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, as I'm processing all this. So Councillor Pettingill's concern is that he put forward a motion, and it was done within a reasonable amount of time for our budget deliberation. And if I understand correctly, your concern is that this motion may put us in a situation where in 2026, should we make a decision to move forward in some other direction, we may not have a budget allocated for it, so we'll be pushed to the 2027. Is that a fair summary of your concern?
With one additional nuance, the sort of initial direction from council to deliver something for us to contemplate hasn't been delivered still. And so I'm not able to have this discussion on the sort of thing that council asked for.
Thanks. And this is a question for staff, is it the timescale of presenting the scope of the emergency management plan? In my view, this is where this piece really fits, is our ability to understand this pipeline impacts our ability to do emergency management. Will we see that? Will we be able to see that before the spring amendment, or any possible spring amendment?
Trying to think of how I can answer this. Can I just have a second? Thank you for the pause. The short answer is yes, there's a very good likelihood that we can get this back before council, before the spring amendment.
So,
If there is.
in an effort to get the debate, or to turn this into debate about the motion, I'm going to move the staff recommendation, and I'd speak to it if it's seconded, and would welcome debate on amending it further if that's what's needed. Councillor French seconds. Thank you. So my thought process here is that this is a proposal to address our ask. And the first motion we passed was to address a gap that we felt existed. I think this approach where we have Fortis present, and I might amend my own motion to include an extended invitation to the energy regulator present, and leaving that conversation, we might have some unanswered questions, and then we engage with the emergency management plan industrial on the scope, see how many of those questions will be answered through that process, and see if there's a remaining gap. And then we can articulate the scope of that gap very clearly, and it will be very clear and fresh in everyone's mind what that is. So and then we can action that either through council contingency if it fits, or potentially if it requires more than that, or we may have the option of including whatever step, if needed, in the spring amendment. And there is the possibility that through that, the emergency management plan industrial, the scope of that plan may address the concerns that council has coming out of, because we will come out of item 5 with unanswered questions and concerns, like, for sure. So that's that's how I see this process going, and I think that yeah, anyways, I think that's an appropriate course of action, and then we can see where that journey takes us. I'm going to go to Councillor French as a seconder if you have a comment, and then I'll go to, then I'll come around. I'll start with Councillor Pettingill. I'll work around.
Yeah, I'm going to test an amendment. So in number 6 after industrial, inclusive of a high level individual and societal risk assessment of the pipeline. And I will speak to why if seconded. I'm adding that.
Oh, that was a seconder. So Councillor Greenlaw seconds. Go ahead.
I think I want to, just because of the experience on this, I want to be very clear that this objective doesn't get lost. And if Fortis answers this and deals with it, then we'll have the answer. And so that's dealt with. It's included in the plan. If Fortis doesn't, and then we can include it in the plan. If it's in the scope, great. If not, we can have that discussion and this doesn't get lost. I want to make it explicit. Right now, it makes no mention of that. It's I just feel it's very important that we sort of make it explicit that that is an expected outcome. We need to have a conversation if that's not going to happen. And so I don't want this to get lost.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor, or 1 second. I'm going to go to Ms. Pompidou.
Could I just get the wording for the motion again?
Yes, let's do that.
So in number 6, after the word industrial, inclusive of individual and societal risk of the pipeline.
Okay, Councillor Greenlaw.
Yeah. First thing, I'm gonna have a hard time supporting this without splitting the motions. I say that because I don't see the point in having Fortis come back to have this conversation. I think that potentially what we should do, if it's possible, is have a representative from the BCER come in, so we can actually have a conversation with the regulatory authority and actually address some of the questions that we have. Because like grant the emergency management plan, and I was trying to allude to this earlier with my comments. Once we have these large industrial players in our community, that is something that we need to revisit. But my larger concern is our land usage and how we're zoning, and if we should be densifying along these pipelines. And I think that piece is something that Fortis is not going to be able to answer. We have to go to the horse's mouth and who is setting the regulations for Fortis, which is the regulatory body. I don't really see a point in having Fortis present to council because I'm not sure they're going to be able to answer the questions and the concerns that we have.
Okay. Other comments on the amendment? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Well, I appreciate my council colleagues. I think intent here to try and make sure that this gets captured. I think that this just muddies the water even further. It's like it doesn't actually provide any additional direction. It just folds it all unto itself. So to me, it's like we either go ahead and we put some money in the budget and we get the high level 5-page risk assessment that you're talking about, or we do these steps and we consider a budget amendment in the spring amendment, or we put some council contingency to it. But adding that language in the emergency management plan industrial just feels like it is adding additional work to something that is already in place. And if part of my assumption is that the emergency management plan industrial should account for what the risk levels are. When you start doing emergency management planning, you should kind of evaluate what that risk level is. And if that's not included in it, or it's not to your satisfaction, or you need more detail, then we'd cross that bridge when we get to it.
Thank you. Process-wise, we can, if we need to, we can consider severing the motion into a couple pieces. Just to reply to Councillor Greenlaw's suggestion, I think we should add the invite to the BCER. I have to say, having been sat through the presentation from both, the Fortis part of it was actually the more useful part than the BCER conversation, which is shocking and disappointing, but that was my experience there. So just to throw that out there, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Stoner, and if yeah, go ahead.
Just very briefly, and maybe this is showing how far out of our depth we are, but I'm pretty sure it's the BCOGC, the Oil and Gas Commission, that is the regulator, not the ER.
I'll let the record show there was a shake of the head over there, but that's okay. The appropriate regulator. I'm going to go to Councillor Anderson.
With respect to item number 6 in the emergency management plan industrial, I prefer we keep it clean as is and add split the other element. And the reason is that I'm looking for in that emergency management plan industrial, I want to be satisfied that there's satisfactory integration, readiness, preparedness, coordination. And I sometimes see that there's conversations that need to be linked up here in Northern Howe Sound between our industrial players. And there's more to do in that respect, I suspect. So I'd rather treat this element alone and assess it with other lenses. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Penning. Well, I'll come back to you before we vote on it, just to be sure. Anyone that hasn't spoken on this amendment? The recommendation as presented, I think, leaves us the opportunity to engage with the scope and understand what this project is. And I've heard about, we've heard that this is a project that's coming, but I think understanding the scope also gives us an opportunity to ensure we understand the deliverables and we're not duplicating efforts, as well as if that scope and the deliverables don't address the concern, then that's the place for it. So I agree with Councillor or with other voices that have said that it's stronger the cleaner we leave it, and an opportunity to direct work is there once we understand the scope, and if there's any trade-off in adjusting that scope to address questions that we may have as we get there. So for those reasons, I won't be supporting the amendment, but I do think that this path is the path to having the types of things put forward in the amendment addressed in a responsible and organized way. Anyone that hasn't spoken, and I'll go back to Councillor Pettingill before I call the question on the amendment.
So I want to understand with the discussion and what is, if this fails, what staff's understanding would be in terms of council expectation, in terms of dealing with some of the high level risk assessment. Would there be any sort of on the part of staff sort of effort or direction to sort of address this, or would staff sort of not be looking at this and we're just sort of kicking it down the road, and if council wanted it, just nothing would happen until we see the scope? Or is there, would there be some proactive addressing of this given the conversation?
I just want to make sure that you're saying in the event that I just want to make sure we're talking amendments and the main motion. So you're talking about the main motion, whether it's amended or not. If it fails, what direction does staff have at that point? Is that your question?
If the amendment fails, but the main motion succeeds.
So I think we need to go through this and then then we can check, because we're talking about amendment. And I don't want to get into inviting too many what if scenarios from staff is not bordering. I believe it essentially invites debate. So if it's technical clarity, that's fine. But I think that's too speculating there is too far for me. So I'm going to go ahead and call the question, or unless do you have comment at this point? I just want to make sure that we're.
I recognize this is out of process because the motion's on the floor. But for clarity, the staff's recommendation that's on the slide is to seek and obtain enough information about the pipeline risk to inform emergency management response. It is not to seek information to determine land use planning.
Okay, so on the amendment, which that comment stands across the board, amended or not. So I'm going to call the question on the amendment. All in favor and opposed? Councillor French, Anderson, Hamilton, Stoner, Mayor Herford opposed. Amendment fails. So we're back to the main motion. Comments on this? Councillor Pettingill, you tried the amendment. Would you like to speak to this motion, or you want me to come back to you? It was yours. The floor was yours when we started into the amendment process.
Yeah, I think staff just said quite explicitly they as this stands, they will not be addressing the questions I've been asking, which is to inform, do we need to do, to give us at a quick $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 price ballpark? Is there something here where we need to do more in depth, a future study to decide if there's something to worry about in terms of land planning? Because all the evidence I've seen is that there is a real significant risk here. I want to ground truth that before pushing us to a bigger investment. And we've just heard from staff that as is, this doesn't address that. We still haven't seen, and so maybe I need to retest my original motion, which we still haven't seen the output from that, which we directed.
This is one of the suggestions on how to address that. And I think if this motion fails, this is the part that then our original piece, in my mind, stands, and another option comes forward. That's my interpretation. Could staff confirm that? Like this is that original motion would stand, and would we not need to go back to the drawing board, or we need a subsequent motion to further investigate?
Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I caught it.
That's okay. It's good. So should this motion fail, which includes language around, the first motion, and really this recommendation is coming to address in response to that first motion. If this isn't a council deems this not a path they'd like to proceed, then would that first motion not still stand, and there'd be a subsequent conversation or recommendation, or is this it? I'm just trying to understand, to make sure that we know the impact of our vote.
Can I take a minute to confer with the corporate officer, please?
Yep, absolutely. Let's recess. We'll do a 5-minute recess just to be clear. All right, we are back. Over to you, Ms. Glende.
Thank you through the mayor. Appreciate the recess to understand what to do here in the motion. So if the motion that's on the screen, the proposed motion today to council isn't passed, then what we would recommend is, I think for clarity, that council reaffirm the motion you want to see, whether that's the original motion that was on November 25th, or a different one, but I think a motion subsequently would be the best course of action from a clarity point of view.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So we'll keep going around comments. Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, I've got an amendment to propose on item 6. Present the scope of the emergency management plan industrial at a future committee of the whole meeting before the September or the spring 2026 budget amendment.
Just, I think we might want to go just, I understand your intent. If it came on the same day, but before on the agenda, it might meet that. So just like with a reasonable buffer to the, or something like that might be reasonable. We're trying to be like extra clear. I just want to make sure that we don't see it one week and have the amendment the next week and not have the room to do it you're intending. But okay, it's also moved and seconded, so I don't want to, as is.
I think the intent is, I hope the intent is clear. Yeah.
Okay, you can speak, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that it's important that so that the spirit of the first motion in it coming to budget, because it may be a budget decision, it's important that when we go through this process, which is understanding this issue, the present council understanding this issue in a deeper way, that we do so in a timeline that we can still address any budgetary concerns or any budget amendments that we may need to make as a result of this information.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this? All right, I will call, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would test a further amendment that everything prior to council, so council direct, starting with council direct staff, strike everything before that. So basically asking to strike the piece. Oh, sorry, we're on the amendment still? Oh, sorry, jumping ahead of myself.
Yeah, we're dealing with the amendment that is focuses on the timing prior to the spring amendment. Which did our minute taker get the wording of that? Sorry, I confused likely by jumping in with some comments. Go ahead.
I have that the following language be added at the end of bullet point 2 before the spring 2026 budget amendment.
And just for extra clarity, it's bullet point 6 on our thing, but there's only 2. Yeah, okay. Comments on that amendment? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I'm going to suggest further amendment, item 1 or 5, depending on how you're scoring this, to amend it to include the invitation to the energy regulator to be included with that Fortis piece. Second by Councillor Stoner. I think having a fulsome conversation on this and inviting the relevant parties leads us to making the soundest decisions here. So I think it is an important piece of the puzzle, even though those can be challenging conversations, but that's what we're here to do. So any other comments on this? I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. We're back to a well-amended main motion now. Other comments? Councillor Hamilton?
Yeah, Thanks for bringing this alternative forward. I think it is important for our community to many of our community are starting to think about this, but as the pipeline construction actually comes through town in January, I think that this will become more front of mind for folks in the community. And I think that having a conversation about the emergency management plan will be timely in light of the construction that people will see coming this January, I believe.
Yep. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you to the chair. I'm hesitant on supporting this motion. Well, I appreciate the additions and the amendments that have been made that I think make it stronger and provide a little bit of a certainty that if this comes before the spring amendment, that we might have some flexibility to do some further work on the societal and individual risk assessments that my colleague has been asking for consistently for many years now. I don't think that this is going to get us to where we hoped we would, and we've had Fortis come through these doors many a times. The presentation is publicly available, so I'm not sure if any additional information will actually be of utility there or will be presented. I do think elevating the emergency management plan to a future committee of the whole and having a discussion about that is helpful. And I think that is the one piece that I'm curious about, better understanding how our staff are understanding the risk assessment component as it ties to our emergency management planning. And if there's some tidbits in there on better understanding how our organization is managing and understanding that risk and potential flow through to further work. So with the backstop of the spring amendment, I'm leaning towards supporting this, but happy to hear what my council colleagues have to say.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Was that your hand, Councillor French? No, Councillor Pennegill.
So I think it's important to think about how risk works. And so for emergency management, you're sort of assuming a high consequence worst case. And so it's sort of risk is not in the picture because you're just dealing with consequence and how do you react to a consequence. What risk does is sort of bring in the probability of that consequence. And so over a long time, and therefore to mitigate that risk, what sort of, if there is such a risk, what sort of land plan you need to do. And so I think it's important to take to heart Ms. Glenday's comment that staff would not be looking at risk in terms of this. They'd be looking at consequence, which is only one critical half, but only half of a risk understanding. And so we're still, and I understand the, trying to use the pieces we have, but without explicitly sort of saying we want the risk piece included in this, we need the risk piece included in this, how do we do that? An emergency planning, which is focused on consequence, assuming that the probability has happened because you're reacting. So it's not a probability thing anymore. So it's no longer a risk thing. That's the piece that is fundamentally missing in this and that we won't address. So I'm looking for a way to make sure that piece, that risk piece, doesn't get lost in this.
I think I do think having that having the conversation, including that, is best framed in that emergency management plan piece. And to my colleagues' comments around the value of Fortis and the BCER presenting, that may not be the highest value of these two items, but also I don't know the risk of that except for our time, but it is an opportunity to ask questions and engage with them in a public format and get their answers or lack thereof on the official record. So I think that the question around the probability goes to resourcing as well. Are we resourcing for something that is a extremely low likelihood, or are we resourcing for something that is highly likely? May close the loop on your risk piece. It may not, but that's the discussion that I think is best situated there, which will happen prior to the spring amendment as per this motion. I think I've run through my speakers list. I see no other hands, so I'm going to call the question on the main motion as amended. All in favor? And opposed? Councillor Greenlaw, Stoner, Pettingill, opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I'm going to double check. I think that concludes our business on this agenda, does it not? Councillor Hamilton, yes?
I'd like to move to terminate this meeting, please.
I would like to second that. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah. Are you opposing that, Councillor Stoner? Thank you very much, everybody. That was a huge day, approaching 12 hours. So thank you very much, and enjoy your well-earned break over the holidays. See you next year, except for those